Hello, it's Walter, and it's another day. And you might notice we're still working on our little 1995 Jeep YJ Wrangler and doing the glove box. It's a lot of work doing it, especially because I don't have access to a ton of different tools. So one of the things I needed to show you, and I had talked about it, and you've seen it from the front side, is these little flat pieces that I welded on here. Um, and I don't know if you can really see this well, how that is welded onto the edge of this to cover that up, and I just tacked it around this outside, clamped it on here as best I could, and there you go. But it's pretty flat, pretty level. Don't know if you can see that well. It's got a slight tip to it because it's welded on one side, and the side you weld on will always kind of draw metal toward that side, but that's okay. So the next thing that we want to look at is the pattern I made for my faceplate. So let's take a look at that. You can kind of see what I did. I had some of this cheap Walmart blue foam. So I've cut it in little chunks that I use for different things. Anyway, what I've done here is I stuck one in here, so it gives me about a ½ inch of elevation. And then the next thing I wanted to do is I got this faceplate where it's pretty much flush with the regular dash, and it's pretty close. So, and you can also see on either side I've got a little bit of clearance. I kind of evened that out on both sides. So now what I'm going to do is get my handy dandy mechanical pencil out. I'm going to try to do this carefully, and this little piece goes up in here, and then it sits along the bottom, and then I just have to make sure that's flush along this bottom section, and then I'll try to split the difference between each side, and then I'm going to kind of come in here and hopefully be able to trace this out without creating too much movement of my box. And looking at it, looks like my gaps are still pretty good. Doesn't look like it shifted. And so now I can take a look at this side, and you can see what I was talking about. I'll cut this out, and then I'll come back out here and I'll see how it matches up with the edges of my box. And then if it matches up really nice, all I'm going to do is come back and cut this just about an eighth of an inch, just about an eighth of an inch bigger, or maybe 3/16 all the way around. So, and that will cause it to come down about halfway in the middle of my little straps there. So I'm going to go cut that, and then I'll be right back. And here's the faceplate that I made. It's got a little bend in it, and you'll appreciate that when, from looking at the other videos, how it's going to kind of blend in with the top part of the dash there. And this is what I'm talking about when this thing sits on here. You can see, so you can see how the faceplate will overlap this piece by an eighth of an inch or so, and then you can see how my door will actually sit in here flush and will hit this also, so the door can't be pushed in either. So this is just a rough guess. The outside dimension is pretty accurate, and then I figured out my other dimensions for my faceplate. So if you're looking for the measurements, the length of this thing is about 14 7/8 of an inch in width, and then the height on this is about 10 inches. Now these other dimensions, this is 1 3/4 inches on either side, and then this is 1 3/8 of an inch. This is 3 1/4. The difference here is 1 3/4, and then this is 1 1/2. So 1 1/2 is where I want to put my bend. And the other way you could do that is just cut these all in strips, in order to cut my metal, I used an angle grinder, and I dropped it in there and then cut it, which is kind of a rough way to do it. And I cut it a little bit small so then I can grind it down to my line so I can get it nice and square on my metal. And I went ahead and started working on that already, so I'm going to show that to you in just a minute. But these are the dimensions that you'll need, and if you follow the dimensions on the box, it should fit in a YJ type Wrangler, chances are, though I would, as I said, test fit everything. And then this is the faceplate that I need to cover up that opening. And I'm thinking as I do this more, what I'm going to do is once this is all cut out and finalized, I'm going to just weld this whole thing together. Now as you can see, it's pretty rough cut. You can see my line here, and I just kind of almost touched it there, but I'm just going to grind this out and file it down. I drilled little holes here, and I'm going to square this all up, and I'll keep this round, and I'll probably use a file. And then when I make my door, I'll actually transfer this and set it on the metal plate and scribe it out, so my door, I want to fit fairly close. It was a lot of work cutting this thing out with my angle grinder. Makes a lot of noise. I wear a respirator, just a particulate respirator, and a face shield and safety glasses and gloves and earmuffs. Sometimes I see people wearing safety glasses and maybe a respirator, but they don't have any earmuffs when they're running that stuff, and this stuff is tremendously loud. People say, oh, you get used to the noise. Well, you don't get used to it, you just don't hear it as well, so it doesn't bother you as much because you're losing your hearing. So don't, if you use power tools, always practice safety, and it's just the same with everything. And whatever you do, always think ahead. Think about the consequences of what you're doing if something goes wrong. Like when I was using this and cutting these out, I had to think about that, so I wore heavy gloves and a long sleeve shirt and made sure things weren't going to get caught in here, and cut it out. So okay, so the next step for me is actually to clean this up and grind it out, and so it'll be nice and consistent, nice and square, and it'll fit on here. So I'm going to take care of that. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. This is how I'm grinding this to size. You can see it's like probably an 1/8 inch or thereabouts to 1/16 short of where I need to be. So I clamp this thing all up on my in my power rack, and it's also my workbench. So what I'm going to do is just grind down until I'm almost hitting this, and then I'll just file it off with this. And then when I'm done, I'm going to round this all off and smooth it a little bit. You can see this edge right here has already been done, and so has this edge. And then I use this little rat tail file. This is actually used for sharpening chainsaws, but it works really good for creating these little radiuses up in there. So I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's pretty square. I mean, pretty lined up pretty good. So for just doing this with a hand grinder and hand tools, you can get pretty accurate, so things will look pretty good. So I'm going to grind out the rest of this and this side, and then I'll finish that all up, and once that's done, I'll see you back on camera. Okay, so you saw my the edge that I cut on this, and it's kind of rough looking. I got fairly close to my line. You can actually set up a board or another piece of metal with a couple clamps, clamp your material down, and use that board to guide your angle grinder, so you can make a straighter cut than what I did. But I was able to file mine down without a whole lot of work to get it close to what I wanted. If you take a look at this piece of metal, this is where I cut it on my bandsaw, and then this edge, which is rusted, was actually sheared with a power shear, and the same with this piece of metal. This edge was cut with my bandsaw, and then this edge, which was actually sheared. So if I hold these together, you might be able to see a little bit of light through there possibly, I don't know. But then if I hold that down here where I actually cut this, and I'm putting this sheared edge against this edge that I ground down and filed, and you can see it actually it actually looks pretty good. So if you're careful, you could do some pretty high quality work even with hand tools, even working with metal. So the next thing I need to do is, because this piece here, my faceplate actually folds over a little bit, I need to do that. Now, as I was talking about before, you could actually cut this one piece, cut this strip out, and then figure out your angle and tack weld it on the back, adjust it a little bit, just a couple tacks, so you can move it a little bit, get it where you want, and then weld it the rest of the way. But welds, a lot of times when you weld one side, will pull this metal toward the weld. So it might actually, as you weld on this back side, it's going to pull this straighter, and then your angle might not be what you want. So what I'm going to do is I scribe this using my dimensions off here of 1 3/4, which is from here to here, and then the other dimension is 1 1/2 from the top down to here. This is where I want to scribe my line, which I already did that, and now I'm going to set it up and actually use the angle grinder on here. Now this is a little thicker material than what the box is made out of. This is 1/16, this is 1/8 inch. So this faceplate's going to be fairly heavy duty, but it's what I had laying around here, and I didn't want to have to run out and go to the scrapyard again to get some more material. So this is what I'm using for my faceplate. With that in mind, I'm actually going to scribe this on the back side, and instead of bending it toward the place I slotted, I'm going to bend it in the opposite direction, which will work too. And then once I get that where I want it, I might put a tack or two on here. I'll wait and see when I get to that point. So let's set this up, and I'll show you how I'm going to do it. Okay, so if you look at this, you can see I've got a clamp actually on both ends with a little board running over here, and this is going to be my guide for my scribe line. I put a little piece of metal underneath here just so the weight is concentrated more on the part of my frame, and so this will be nice and solid and stable. Those are clamped down pretty good, and you can adjust this by tapping your metal or tapping your wood one way or another. So you clamp it down fairly snug, not super hard, and then just adjust it. And let me show you how I adjusted that. I'm actually going to let this ride on this little button, and the top part of my angle grinder, and then I'll try to center this wheel right over my scribe line. So let's take a quick close look at that, and hopefully you can see how the button is kind of riding on this, and my wheel I want rolling directly down the center of that line. And there's another angle of that, so you can see how that's going to work. Okay. So there you go, real nice straight cut on that, 3 passes. I think my depth in the groove, I think that depth is pretty good, and what's left over of this on the back side, I'll be able to bend this fairly easily, so I'll give that a shot. So here you can see the bender I made, and I had to cut this groove, I don't know, probably 15-20 times. I did, I think, 6 passes initially, and it wasn't enough, and I did at least another 6. You just got to keep looking at it. Because I don't have a bender, it made it more difficult for me, and I just clamped this piece of square tubing and then a piece of angle iron on the other side, and I lined this up with the edge of my groove, and this has got a sharper edge than the tubing, so I bent it against the angle iron and clamped it down, put some gloves on, and then I just kind of reefed on it, and it actually bent pretty good. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so I went out and I tested this and I made sure my bend was the right amount, and it is. It's pretty close, so I'm going to leave it as it is. As you can see, it made a pretty nice bend through here. You can look at the back, you can see with the groove where I notched it. And this is plenty strong enough. I don't even think I need to weld anything along here, so I'm just going to leave it alone, other than filing it to take the little edge off it. Even though it's going to be covered, I'm going to file it anyways. And then I'll file down all my edges and round them off a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same with this, is I'm going to round this off a little bit all the way around, just with a file. Okay, so I filed all my edges down. They're pretty smooth, so they're not too bad. And the same thing with this, I filed the outside edge of this all down. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to, before I weld this on here, I need to make my door that's going to fit in here. And so what I did is I lined it up very carefully with the top edge of this plate and the side edge, and left a really thin gap, like maybe a hair's width, because I want this to fit pretty tight, and I'd rather cut it and have it slightly big, and then I can file it to fit, versus cut it too small, and then what am I going to do? So with this laid out here, I just scribed around this corner really carefully, and you have to be really careful in holding on to this thing to make sure it's not going to shift when I'm scribing my lines. So I'll double check all my lines. I'll put my palm on here, and then this side looks pretty good. So what I will do is first thing I'll do is I'll cut this little piece off, and then this should fit on 3 sides. If it doesn't, I'll file this and get it where it fits pretty close, and then I can set these 3 sides in here, and then just double check this last line and make sure this little bit is correct before I cut this off. I don't want to cut this side then this side and find out I goofed up. So I only have to cut 2 sides, so I'm going to cut the shorter one first, and that way this will drop down in here, and when I have it sitting underneath here like this will be able to drop down a little bit more on each edge, and that'll give me a better platform to scribe this and just make sure it fits. Now because every corner I kind of did freehand and rat tail filed them out a little bit, each corner might be a little slightly different. So that's why this is going to fit in here just one way. Once it's cut out, chances are it's not going to fit as good this way or if I flipped it. So I want to remember my orientation. So in this case, on the back side, I just put a little T for top, and I'll keep that on the inside, and that's how this will fit. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this, and then I'll recheck it, rescribe it, and then I'm going to work on this and cutting it on my bandsaw and making sure the whole thing is going to fit here really well. Once I weld this on here, I'll tack it, and then I'll go out and check everything. And then I need to set up a hinge on here, so it'll hinge. I need to drill this out for the lock. I'll have to drill a hole and cut a hole out up in here for the locking tab to swing into. And then I'll also, on the front faceplate of my Wrangler, I'll put an L bracket, which will bolt here, and it'll come across like this, and will bolt on the back side of the dashboard. So that's something else I got to think about. So you've got all these little things going on here right now that you need to keep aware of. You don't get too far ahead of yourself in one area and realize, oh, I didn't do this. Like if I had welded this faceplate on here, it would have made it really difficult to outline the opening onto my glove box door. So before you tack weld this on here and then test fit it, you want to make sure you've cut your door out so your door is going to fit properly. So next step, got to cut this. Now, seeing as how if I had a dedicated shop somewhere, I would actually build longer legs and a different frame and everything for my saw so I could get it up higher where I could use it more effectively. But since I don't have that, and I'm a tall person and this is built kind of for short people, a lot of times when I'm cutting metal on here, I just sit right on my saw, and it makes it more stable, and then I can guide this a lot more effectively. So let's cut it out. Remember, I want to leave that inside part of the line, so I want to cut on that side of the line. So let's see if I can get this squared up pretty good. Notice too that once I got in here a little ways, my thumb slipped off this a couple times, so I put my hand behind here so that way if I slipped, I didn't run my thumb into the saw blade. So just something you got to be aware of. Okay, we're going to go test fit this and then file what we need to file. So I'm going to make sure I keep it oriented right. That's the top and the inside, so I can put that down like that. Slide this up in here. And you can see I just got to take a little bit off it. So I'm going to file that and then I'll get back to the picture. Okay, I got this all filed, got it to fit. I think it's going to look pretty good. It'll hinge on this bottom part right down here. I'll set it in there and my hinge will be attached there and drops right in there, and that's about how it's going to fit. So nice, snug, good looking fit right there. It just takes a little bit of work. Took a good hour or more to file it and bring my lines in and catch the corners, so everything looks really nice. So now my next step before I weld this onto the box is I want to drill my hole and put my little lock in here. So I'm using this style right here, just a cabinet type lock. So I need to lay that out, which I already figured this out because I want this tab, I'm going to have to cut a hole in here, and this tab will actually run up into a hole. So the first thing I need to do is get this mounted to my door. And I figured out that dimension already, how far I needed this tab to stick up. So I'm going to drill it from the back side. And this is a 3/4 inch diameter I need. I don't have a bit that big, but I do have a unibit, an Irwin unibit. These things are worth their weight in gold. It goes up to like a 1 1/8, so 3/4 is no problem. I'll drill a couple pilot holes for this. I came down 7/8 of an inch, and therefore if I go 3/8 on either side of this, then that will give me my 3/4 inch hole, and then I centered it from this side. So this is the top. So when you lay that out, you always want to make sure you're laying it out on the right side, because if I flip this around anyway, my door probably won't fit as nice. So just paying attention to detail at this point. Find my little center line right there, my crosshairs mark, put a little ping on it, and then I'm going to make a little bigger divot in here with this one. So come in there. Perfect. Now I just got to drill it out. Look at that. Thing of beauty. Nice fight. Nice tight fit. Okay. Okay, next step, I got to take this little nut off. It just slides in and out of there. Top. I've drilled my hole appropriately. That just goes in here. in there. A little crooked. There we go. Key facing up, tab facing up. Perfect. Now to cut my slot in my glove box. Okay, so I know from here to there is just a hair over 3/4 of an inch. Maybe a 1/16 over. So what I can do is, I know this is a 1/16 of an inch thick, so I could subtract a 1/16 of an inch off of 3/4, and I can scribe a line on this side and then find the center point and then make a like a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch slot right there. So we take a 1/16 off of 3/4. Same over here, 3/4. Scribe a little line. Right there, center point. This is 11 1/4, so 5 1/2 plus 1/2 of a quarter should be 5 5/8. And if you're not sure, you can check it going the other way. 5 5/8, exactly. 5 5/8. Connect my little lines. And that should be the center spot right there. So 5 5/8, right on the nose. All right. So now it's a matter of drilling a hole. Probably about 1 inch or so. We'll start off with that. I can always make it a little bigger. And what I'll do is drill a hole on either side of that. And then I'll cut my slot. And one thing I want to try to do is, in order to make this tight, and you can adjust this to a degree depending on if your tab is too far this way and it's hitting, you can file metal back to reduce metal here, which in effect is like shortening this up. 3/4 and about a 1/16. So I actually want to cut on this side of the line. So depending on how wide a hole you want it to be, you want your hole to be on this side of the line, because this is the line you want to cut so that your door shuts and is fairly snug. And I would probably go even a little bit toward this way and then file it back to get it where I want, and that way you can adjust it so you can get your door nice and snug. I'm coming 1/8 deeper away from this line, and I'll drill my hole, and then I'll cut this out, and then and then I'll file back to that edge. Okay, I drilled my holes and it's so hot out here, my camera actually cut out, so I had to go cool my camera down and put a new battery in it. One thing you can do is drill these holes a little bigger, and if you do, of course, you want to space this further out from your line so your hole will just kind of touch your line. And then you can use like a little mini hacksaw and adjust your blade and run it down through the hole, put the blade through the hole, connect it, and then saw that way. I'm going to try using this little Dremel tool that my dad gave me. There you go. So now the issue is I need to drill this slot a little longer, and I think my distance is going to be really good for this fitting snug. You can also bend this tab one way or another to adjust the snugness of your door when you close it, but I think I'm pretty spot on. So I need to lengthen it because this part of the latch is actually hitting over here. So what I want to do is drill another hole over on this area here, and I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to come an 1/8 inch of away from my line. And I think about over here ought to do it. I think that's pretty good right around there. So I'll drill a little hole in there. Okay, so I drumbled that out, made it a little bigger. I'll just have to file these, smooth it out a little bit. But when I put my door on here, this should fit pretty good. So there you go, nice and snug. I'll just clean that up a little bit. Just the way I want it. Okay, so I'll file that clean. Looks like this is going to work okay, and we'll get on to the next step.